The Holy Gospel according to Matthew, the 13th chapter.
Glory to you, O Lord.
Jesus put before them another parable. The kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed that someone took and sowed in his field. It is the smallest of all the seeds, but when it has grown, it is the greatest of shrubs and becomes a tree, so that the birds of the air come and make nests in its branches. He told them another parable. The kingdom of heaven is like yeast that a woman took and mixed in with 3 measures of flour until all of it was leavened. The kingdom of heaven is like treasure hidden in a field, which someone found and hid. Then in his joy he goes and sells all that he has and buys that field. Again, the kingdom of heaven is like a merchant in search of fine pearls. On finding one pearl of great value, he went and sold all that he had and bought it. Again, the kingdom of heaven is like a net that was thrown into the sea and caught fish of every kind. When the net was full, they drew it ashore, sat down, and put the good into baskets, but threw out the bad. So it will be at the end of the age. The angels will come out and separate the evil from the righteous, and throw them into the furnace of fire, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Have you understood all this? They answered, Yes. And he said to them, Therefore every scribe who has been trained for the kingdom of heaven is like the master of a household, who brings out of his treasure what is new and what is old. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, O Christ.
Have you ever had to say, words escape me right now? Or, I just don't have the words to describe this. Or, I'm at a loss for words. Those are all a few different ways to describe the same thing. You know, that time when you have this incredible experience that simply cannot be described using any words that normally come to the tips of our tongues. Maybe the experience is so indescribable because it was too powerful for words in the first place. I mean, think about it. When we tell stories or when we recount the details of an experience that we had, we want the same excitement and energy and power to come through those words of our stories that as when we first encountered the first time it happened. I mean, that's usually the point of sharing a story, isn't it? Words are such an important and interesting part of our life and of storytelling. You know, they're the basic building block of how we communicate with one another. Sure, centuries of practice have given us other tools for communication, such as gestures or inflection, volume, pace of how fast or how slow you might read something, rhyming, timing, etc. And that's just spoken word. When we look at the written word and when the printing press came along, then we added styles of fonts and capitalization and punctuation and word size and much more. And now with technology, we get tweets and LOLs and hashtags and likes and all those other things them whippersnappers can come up with for their tech savviness. But why? Why stories? Why words? I want to argue today that words aren't just used to communicate something or to describe something, but rather words are used to recreate an experience or make something happen. I mean, isn't that why we've added all those things to our communication toolbox than just words? I mean, we want others to feel those words, experience those words, and get as much out of them as absolutely possible. Well, what are some examples? Have you ever said, I love you to someone? Or had it said to you? What about, I hate you? What kind of experiences do those words create? What do they do Speaking of words that do things, what about the words, I do? Those are words that do something. They create something. They create a relationship in that case. What feelings do you get when someone tells you, I've got some great news for you? I bet when you hear it, your entire body responds when you hear something like that. And the same goes for, you've won. Or what about the times that you might hear, I'm sorry, but we've got some bad news for you? Again, that often elicits just a response from all over your body. Why? Because when those words are spoken to you, they are meant to mean something specifically to you, which is what words are supposed to do. It's what words are supposed to do when we're here in our worship services. And I'll be the first to admit that these worship services are word heavy. There are a lot of words being spoken in this hour or so that we're together. Between the liturgy and the scripture and the sermons and the hymns and songs, all in the hopes that these words, though, will create an experience for us, an experience of God. Some pieces will speak to us some more than others, and on a different day, those pieces will speak to others more than some. But that's why our liturgy is repeated for weeks or months or years or a lifetime. These words are supposed to become so familiar and personal that they do something in us. They are meant to work in order that we experience something. And I hope we've started to see that these past couple weeks as we've heard these different parables from Jesus. Because these parables aren't simply short anecdotes that Jesus tells willy-nilly. Rather, these parables are meant to mean something to you. They're meant to do something in you. And we often think, as we heard a couple weeks ago, that they're about something or someone else other than us, but those parables then turn on us, becoming about us and doing something to us. But these past couple weeks, we've gotten just a single parable at a time, and often they come with words of explanation from Jesus on what they could mean. Today, though, Jesus seems to let loose and let those parables fly. So in addition to being like seeds that are sown or weeds that grow up among wheat, the kingdom of heaven is now like a mustard seed, yeast, a hidden treasure, a searching merchant, and a net. And I do have to admit that right now, none of those parables are really doing anything for me. So I wanted to go back and get a bigger picture of what was going on that day. So remember that Jesus was speaking to and teaching this large crowd that had gathered. And they were on the side of the seashore, and in fact, the crowd became so large that Jesus got out into the boat and went out into the water a little ways so that he could see everyone there and vice versa. So he was preaching to this large group of people, and he wanted his words to matter. He wanted his words to do something. And that's why I think he gave multiple parables. The kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed that grew into the greatest tree, big enough to hold all kinds of birds and nests. Well, I'm guessing a lot of the crowd, just like us, are thinking, okay, cool. A tiny seed that grows into a big tree. I guess that's impressive. But anyone who's actually worked with the land back then knew that mustard seed actually doesn't grow into trees or even shrubs. But instead, it grows into this invasive reed that runs rampant in their fields and kills their crops. So those folks who knew all that probably shuddered at the thought of what that little seed can do. So then for others, Jesus said, well, the kingdom of heaven is like yeast that was mixed with flour so that they got leavened bread. Well, again, great. Something small that goes in, mixed in with the right ingredients to do something. But for those in the crowd who had experienced the true nature of yeast in that day and knew how much of a contaminant it becomes and contaminates all those things you try to make, well, that sends shivers down their spine, thinking about all the food that they've lost due to that little particle. Well, are you still not feeling it? All right, fine. The kingdom of heaven is like a treasure that was found in a field, or a pearl that was found for sale. Once they were found, the finder sold all of their possessions in order to purchase that field or that pearl. So some began to think, wow, could you imagine the joy of finding that one treasure? I've been looking for something like that for years. Well, others are taken aback at the thought of selling all their worldly possessions, how hard they've worked for their stuff and the things that they do with their stuff, and just to sell it for one thing, it's unbelievable. But Jesus continues, and for you fisher folk, the kingdom of heaven is like a net that was thrown into the sea and caught fish of every kind. And as you looked into the crowd, you could see into the eyes of those who had ever fished before, as they were thinking about the feeling of pulling in heavy nets. Such hard work, but such great reward, they were thinking. So many opportunities for Jesus to connect with these crowds. So many different words that could mean something, that could do something for the listener. So many reactions from the things he said. I'm sure there was unbelief. The kingdom really couldn't be like that, could it? That goes against everything I've ever thought. For some, there was encouragement in those words for what could happen. For some, there was promise in those words for what will happen. And it was felt by those crowds. And it's meant to be felt by us, too. So today, what words are speaking to you? What are the words that do something to you? Which parable here do you feel? Or, as I told the kids, if you were to write your own parable, what would it be? What situation for you encapsulates your experience of Jesus or the kingdom? What experience sets the stage for how you have encountered God? What words, then, do you use to share that story so that your hearers might also have that same encounter? If you can put that into words, that's great. It can be a powerful practice to parabolize, if that's even a word, your own experience of God. But if you can't put it into words, if your experience has taken everything out of you, including your words, well, this morning the Apostle Paul had good news for us too. He told us that when we do not know how to pray as we ought, the Spirit of God intercedes with sighs that are too deep for words. The Spirit of God sighing on behalf of us, giving us voice or sound or utterance when we simply can't. That's good news for us when we have those struggles. So the story of Jesus is one where words spoken for us are words of love and grace and forgiveness. Jesus, the Word, came to live among us, to be part of our story, to walk with us, and to help us tell this great story to a world in need. So go. Live out your own parables, sharing these words and this great word of Christ. Amen.